The chamber smelled like 17 different kinds of air. That was the first thing any human noticed when they walked into the Galactic Council hall. 17 species, 17 atmospheric preferences, all pumped through a filtration system that tried to make everyone comfortable, and succeeded at making no one comfortable. Ambassador Yara Osei had been walking into this room for 11 years. She had stopped noticing the smell after the first 3 months. She noticed everything else. She noticed the way the KEF delegation sat, wide, relaxed, taking up more space than their bodies needed. She noticed that the Murath vote had been on the agenda for 6 days, and already 3 species had shifted their seats closer to the KEF side of the chamber. She noticed that Councillor Veth Kara of the KEF Dominion had not looked at the human delegation once since the session opened. She found that interesting. The vote was simple, at least on paper. The Murath had been raiding outer colonies for 2 years. Small strikes, fast retreats. The kind of harassment that bleeds a border slowly, without ever cutting deep enough to force a response. The KEF Dominion had proposed a punitive action, 15 warships, 3 systems, a show of force to stop the bleeding. The proposal had 16 signatures before it even reached the floor. Humanity's line was blank. It had been blank for 200 years. Veth Kara spoke first. He was 7 feet of pale iridescence and total certainty. The kind of species that had won so many wars they had started to confuse winning with being right. His translator turned his words into flat, clean tones, but the contempt underneath them still came through, the way cold air comes through a closed window. He said the Murath had made their choice. He said the outer colonies deserved protection. He said the council had a duty to act, and that hesitation was itself a kind of violence, a decision to let the weak suffer while the strong debated the fine points of morality. It was a good speech. Osei had heard some version of it 42 times. She wrote nothing on her notepad. She never wrote anything on her notepad. Rashid, her aide, young, careful, still surprised by things, kept his own notes beside her and watched her face for signals. Her face gave him nothing. It had taken him 8 months to understand that the nothing was the signal. The other delegates spoke. The arguments built on each other. By the 3rd speaker, the outcome was not really in question. By the 6th, even the undecided species had shifted their posture toward yes. The chamber had that particular weight that forms when a decision has already been made and is only waiting for the formality of being said out loud. Then it came to humanity. The United Earth delegation, said the chamber clerk, casts its vote. Osei pressed the red button. No. The 43rd consecutive human no vote in military authorization proceedings was recorded in the session minutes. It was noted with the same flat language as everything else. No asterisk, no special flag, no notation that said, perhaps someone should ask why this keeps happening. Veth Kara made a sound. It came from somewhere in his chest, a low harmonic that the translation system rendered as laughter, because that was the closest human word for it. But it was not quite laughter the way humans meant it. It was the sound of a category being confirmed, of a model being validated, of something expected arriving exactly on schedule. Not all of them. Some species were more careful, but enough. The sound moved around the chamber like water finding the low parts of a floor. Osei sat with her hands flat on the table. She waited for it to finish. Then she stood. She had not asked for speaking time. She took it anyway, which was within her rights, and the clerk opened the floor, and the chamber went quiet. Because in 11 years, Yara Osei had stood to speak voluntarily exactly 4 times. The last time had stopped a war between 2 species who had not spoken to each other in a generation. The chamber had learned, slowly, to pay attention when she stood. She spoke simply. She always spoke simply. Not because she lacked complexity, because she had learned that the most dangerous thing in any room is a plain sentence that means 17 things at once. The Murath are raiding the outer colonies because they are cornered and desperate, she said. You are about to turn cornered and desperate into something much worse. We vote no. She paused. We have always voted no. She looked at the chamber, not at Vethkara, not at any one delegation, but at the room itself. The way a person looks at something they have studied for a very long time, and understand better than it understands itself. We know what we are, she said. We are being patient. Vethkara made the sound again, louder this time, with company. The translation system flagged it as amusement, category, dismissive, subcategory, affectionate. The kind of laugh that gets aimed at something harmless, a small animal, a child who has said something sincere and wrong. The vote carried, 16-1. The Murath punitive action was authorized. The chamber cleared the way. Chambers clear after decisions, not with drama, but with the low, practical noise of species who have done what they came to do, and are already thinking about the next thing. Osei gathered nothing from the table, because she had brought nothing to the table. She stood, adjusted her jacket, and walked toward the exit at the same pace she always walked. Rashid caught up to her in the corridor. He was still new enough to ask the questions she would not answer. He asked this one anyway. The patience line, he said. What did that mean exactly? She did not look at him. She kept walking. File the session transcript, she said. Full audio. Subdirectory 7 under the Defense Archive. That directory doesn't get regular review. I know. He filed it that evening. He labeled it with the date and the vote number and a brief description. There was no reason to flag it. It was one more human no vote in a record full of human no votes. And the record was very long and very consistent. And nobody in the galaxy had ever looked at it long enough to ask what that consistency meant. That was fine. Osei walked to the transit port and took the shuttle back to the human compound. She ate dinner alone. She read a report on agricultural supply lines running through the outer colonies, the same colonies the punitive action was meant to protect, and she made 3 small notes in the margins, in handwriting so tight that Rashid would have to enlarge it to read it. The notes were not about the Marath. They were not about the vote. They were about fuel depot capacity, shipping route flexibility, and how long it typically takes a cornered species to stop acting desperate and start acting dangerous. Outside, the Keth fleet was already moving toward the border. The galaxy watched this and felt reassured. Osei watched it and felt something she had been carrying for a very long time shift slightly in her chest. The specific feeling of a door she had been hoping would stay closed, beginning, slowly and inevitably, to open. The Keth Military Intelligence Report on Meridian Station was 43 pages long and completely correct. Every measurement was accurate. Every number checked out. The station had 4 defensive platforms, aging but functional. 2 escort vessels, light class, short range. A crew of 300, mostly engineers and supply workers, with a small security detail that existed mainly to handle the occasional docking dispute. The Keth fleet assigned to the operation numbered 40 warships. The analysts had run the numbers 6 different ways. Every version of the math gave the same answer. This would be easy. The Keth did not want a battle. They wanted a signal. One quick, clean demonstration of force aimed at human-controlled space. Nothing permanent, nothing that couldn't be walked back diplomatically. Just enough pressure to see what humanity would do when pushed. The Council had been asking that question in quiet rooms for 2 centuries. The Keth Dominion had decided to ask it out loud. Commander Ireth Voss of the Keth Strike Fleet had run 41 operations. He had never lost one. He was the kind of officer who slept well before engagements, because he had done the preparation and trusted the numbers, and understood that war at its core was just applied mathematics. He dropped his fleet out of FTL, At 0600 station time, Meridian Station was still there, lit up against the dark, exactly where it was supposed to be. So were 43 human ships. HFY stared at his display for 3 full seconds, which was the longest he had ever stared at anything without acting on it. His sensor officer read the data twice, and then read it a third time, and then said, very quietly, that the reading was confirmed. 43 human vessels, formation locked, running full combat configuration. The math had been correct 6 hours ago. 6 hours ago was no longer relevant. The human ships should not have been able to arrive this fast. No model of human FTL capability accounted for ships at this position, at this time, in these numbers. The models were built from public data, transit logs, commercial shipping records, the occasional sensor readings shared through Council intelligence channels. The models were good models. Nobody had thought to ask whether humanity had given them good data to build from. 18 months earlier, the United Earth government had completed a quiet upgrade to their FTL drive systems. The improvement was significant. It had not been announced. It had been filed in a commercial shipping regulatory document under a subsection that dealt with drive emission standards. The kind of document that gets read by compliance officers and nobody else. Ambassador Osei had personally reviewed the filing language. It was technically complete and strategically invisible. The Keth had not read it. HFY was a good commander. He did not panic. He assessed, he ran the options. He had 40 warships against 43, and the element of surprise was gone. But the firepower was comparable, and the mission objective was a signal, not a slaughter, and signals could still be sent. He gave the order to engage. The battle that followed lasted 4 hours and 11 minutes. It was not the battle HFY had trained for. It was not the kind of battle the Keth had ever fought, against any species, in 31 wars. The human fleet did not charge. It did not form a defensive wall around the station. It split, cleanly, without confusion, like something that had been planned a long time ago and was only now being executed. And it went for the Keth command vessels first, not to destroy them, to silence them. The human targeting was so precise that HFY later spent 3 weeks trying to understand how they had known which ships carried command functions. The Keth used rotating command designations as a security measure. The designations had changed 4 times in the previous month. The humans had targeted the correct vessels on the first pass without hesitation, which meant they had not guessed. It meant they knew. It meant they had been watching Keth military communication patterns long enough to identify command nodes from behavioral signatures rather than markings. That thought would wake HFY at odd hours for years afterward. With command communications severed, the Keth fleet fought by instinct. They were brave and disciplined, and they knew their ships. None of that mattered as much as it should have, because the humans were not fighting by instinct. They were executing something. Each human vessel seemed to know exactly where each Keth vessel would move before it moved there. Not because they were reading minds, but because the Keth moved the way they had always moved, and the humans had apparently been paying close attention for a very long time. 19 Keth ships were destroyed or disabled. 6 more had their FTL drives surgically removed by weapons fire precise enough that the rest of the ships stayed intact. The crews were alive. They were stranded. The humans lost 2 ships. Meridian Station was untouched. Not a single hull plate scratched. The 300 crew members, engineers, supply workers, the small security detail, went through the entire 4-hour battle without any of them being hurt. HFY surrendered what remained of his fleet at hour 4. He sent a message to Earth through the standard diplomatic channel. He framed it as an inquiry. He asked what humanity's terms were, what reparations they would demand, what political concessions they required, because these were the questions that came after battles, and he was trying to find familiar ground in a situation that no longer had any. The response came from Admiral Dae-Jung Kwan, commander of Earth Defense Systems. It was sent in Keth military cipher, a cipher the Keth had not known humans possessed. The message itself was 11 words. Go home, tell them what happened, be precise about the details. That was all. No demands, no list of terms, no political statement about what this meant or what would follow. Ireth Voss read the message 4 times, looking for the layer underneath it, the real content that he was supposed to extract and carry back to the Dominion. He eventually understood that the message was the content. The instruction to be precise was not a courtesy. It was the point. Humanity wanted the Dominion to know exactly what had happened. Humanity wanted that information to travel. Ireth Voss went home. He was precise. In the Galactic Council chamber, 3 days later, 17 species read the battle report in silence. The numbers were verified. The timeline was confirmed. The data on human FTL capability was cross-referenced against every public record anyone had access to, and matched nothing that should have made this possible. Veth Kara read the report in his private office. Then he sat for a long time, doing nothing, which was unusual for him. And then he called his senior analyst and asked one question. He asked how long humans had been capable of this. The analyst said she didn't know. She said she would find out. She spent 2 weeks looking. At the end of 2 weeks, she came back and said she still didn't know. But she had found something else. She had found the subdirectory, the one with the session transcripts. 43 of them. 2 centuries of no votes. Every single one with full audio. All of them filed and organized and sitting there untouched. She had started listening from the beginning. She said she would send a full report when she finished. Her face, Veth Kara noted, had the look of a person who had opened a door expecting a closet and found a very long hallway. The emergency session was called within 48 hours of the Meridian Station battle report reaching the council floor. 17 species arrived. Every seat was filled. That alone was notable. Full attendance at emergency sessions was rare, because emergency sessions happened often, and full attendance required effort, and most species had learned to send junior delegates to the ones that didn't directly affect them. This one affected everyone, not because they were involved, because they were witnesses to something they did not yet have the right words for, and witnesses to things without names tend to gather in groups. The chamber felt different. The architecture was the same. The 17 atmospheric feeds ran at their usual settings. The clerk sat at the same position she always sat at, and called the session to order with the same phrase she always used. But the room had a quality to it that did not come from the furniture or the air. It came from the species sitting in the seats. They were paying attention differently. Osei noticed it immediately. She noticed everything immediately. That was the condition of being her, a state of constant, quiet observation that she had long since stopped experiencing as effort. She walked to the human delegation table and set down nothing, because she brought nothing, and she sat, and she folded her hands, and she looked at the room the way she always looked at the room. Rashid sat beside her. He had his notepad. He had not slept well. He had been doing a lot of reading since Meridian, going through files he had not thought to look at before, trying to catch up to a situation that felt like it had been moving for a long time without him. Veth Kara was present. That surprised some of the delegates. After Meridian, there had been quiet speculation about whether the Keth Dominion would withdraw their senior council representative as a gesture of protest or pride. Veth Kara had not withdrawn. He sat in his usual seat, and his color was slightly different from how it usually looked. The iridescence that normally ran warm and confident across his scales had flattened to something cooler. But he was present, which told Osei something. He was still trying to understand it. He was too smart to leave while he still had questions. The Keth representative, A younger member of the delegation, not Vethkara himself, stood to present the Keth position. This was diplomatic etiquette. When a great power has had a bad week, they send someone junior to say the first words, so that the great power retains room to maneuver based on how those words land. The junior representative said the Keth survey fleet had been conducting routine operations in the outer boundary zone. He said the human response had been disproportionate and aggressive. He said unprovoked attacks on Keth vessels constituted a serious violation of Council peace agreements. He said the Keth Dominion demanded a formal censure of the United Earth government and reparations for the vessels lost. He was good. He spoke with confidence, and he stayed on the high moral ground, and he made it sound reasonable, which it would have sounded if everyone in the room had not just read the battle report. Some things are hard to reframe once the numbers are already in front of everyone. Several delegates watched Osei while the Keth representative spoke. Her face did nothing. When the Keth representative finished, the chamber clerk asked if the human delegation wished to respond. Osei stood. She picked up a single document from the table. She had placed it there when she sat down, which was the only thing she had placed on the table, and several delegates had noticed it and wondered about it for the entire Keth presentation. She read from it without preamble. The United Earth government formally notifies the Galactic Council that at 0600 station time, 6 days ago, a Keth Dominion military fleet of 40 warships attacked Meridian Station, a human civilian and logistics installation. 11 human civilians were killed in the opening engagement before our defense fleet could establish a perimeter. Under the United Earth Defense Compact, this constitutes an act of war against humanity. We are not requesting Council authorization to respond. We are filing this document as a courtesy notice. We will handle the matter ourselves. She set the document down. She sat. The chamber was quiet in 17 different ways. Each species had a different relationship with silence. Some filled it reflexively. Some sat inside it comfortably. Some read it like a text. For approximately 12 seconds, all 17 of them simply held it, which was the longest collective silence the Galactic Council chamber had produced in recorded session history. The Keth junior representative said something. The translation rendered it as a procedural objection about the framing of the incident. Nobody in the room appeared to hear it. Rashid was looking at his notepad. He was not writing anything. He was reading something. The subdirectory files he had found 3 days ago, working backward through 2 centuries of sessions. Trying to follow the thread Osei had been laying down across his entire career span and beyond. He was beginning to understand the shape of something very large. The shape was still mostly dark at the edges, but the part he could see was extraordinary. After the session, in the corridor outside, Vethkara made a request. He asked for a closed meeting with Ambassador Osei. 4 minutes, private, no record. She agreed. The 4 minutes took place in a small conference room off the main corridor. There were no aides present on either side. The translation system ran on a closed loop that both parties acknowledged was unrecorded. Nobody knew exactly what was said in that room. What was known was that Vethkara returned to his delegation and immediately placed 7 of his senior analysts on a single task. The task was a full review of every human diplomatic action in 200 years of council membership. Every vote, every statement, every filing, every document, every subdirectory, all of it. The analysts worked for 36 hours straight. At hour 37, the lead analyst submitted her report to Vethkara directly. The report was the result of 36 hours of work by 7 trained specialists reviewing 2 centuries of data. It was 2 words long. They knew. Vethkara read it once. He set it down. He looked out the long window of his office at the space beyond the council station, dark and enormous and full of things that looked one way and were entirely another. He thought about the 43rd no vote. He thought about the patience line. He thought about what Osei had said in the 4-minute meeting that nobody had recorded. He thought about a species that had spent 200 years being laughed at, and had never once corrected the record. He understood, with a clarity that felt like cold water, that the not correcting had been the strategy. That every laugh, every dismissal, every comfortable assumption had been allowed, had been filed away in a subdirectory and left there, organized and untouched for exactly the moment when it would matter. He sat in his office for a long time after that. Outside, Osei was already on the transit back to the human compound. Rashid walked with her and did not speak until they were on the shuttle. Then he said that he had been reading, that he had gotten back about 40 years so far, that he was beginning to think the no votes were not what they looked like. She looked out the shuttle window. "Keep reading," she said. He kept reading. It took him 6 more days to get to the beginning. When he reached the first session, the very first human no vote, 200 years ago, filed and archived and forgotten, he sat in his small office for a while before he could think of what to say. Then he sent Osei one message. It said, "How long did you know it would come to this?" She read it. She did not reply that night. In the morning, before the next session, she stopped by his desk and said 2 words. Long enough. The Keth Dominion had fought 31 wars. They had won 31 wars. This was not luck. The Keth were methodical, patient in their own way, and deeply serious about military preparation. They built good ships. They trained good soldiers. They had a strategic doctrine that had been refined over 4 centuries and had never failed them, not against any opponent in any theater in any of the 31 conflicts that had shaped them into the power they were. The doctrine had a core principle. It said, find the heart and break it. Every species had a heart, a capital world, a command structure, a symbolic center, a thing that if destroyed or threatened, destroyed the will to continue. The Keth were very good at finding hearts. They had broken 31 of them. The work of war, in their understanding, was the work of identification. Find the one thing that sustains the enemy's belief that they can win, and remove it. They spent the first month of the war with Earth looking for the human heart. They did not find it. Not because it was well hidden, because it was not in one place. The United Earth government's military infrastructure was spread across 67 systems, in a configuration that had no single critical node. No command world that if struck would silence the rest. No supply chain with a throat narrow enough to cut. No symbolic center whose fall would mean something to a species that had spent 2 centuries being told it was too soft to fight, and had apparently spent those same 2 centuries preparing for exactly this. The Keth strategists called it a distribution problem. They adapted. They shifted from looking for one heart to looking for clusters, groups of installations whose combined loss would degrade human capacity enough to force a negotiated position. They found the clusters. They struck them. The clusters were already empty. Not abandoned. The stations were active and staffed, and running normal operations right up until the moment the Keth fleet arrived, at which point they found themselves engaging a skeleton crew and a defense system running on automation, while the actual personnel and the actual critical equipment had been quietly relocated 3 weeks prior through commercial shipping routes that the Keth had no reason to flag as unusual. The Keth would take a position and find it hollow. They would take the next one and find it hollow. They were winning ground that cost nothing to give. Admiral Dezhong Quan ran the war from a mid-sized command ship that changed its position every 72 hours. He communicated rarely and briefly. His officers had learned early in their careers under him that long messages from Quan usually meant something had gone wrong. Short messages meant everything was on schedule. Most of his messages during the war were very short. He kept a personal log throughout. His officers assumed it was strategic documentation. After the war, when portions of it were reviewed for the official history, they found it contained almost no strategic content at all. There were entries about prime number sequences he found interesting. There was an extended passage about a card game his daughter had taught him before deployment. There were footnotes, specific restaurants in Seoul, in Accra, in Melbourne, dishes he planned to eat when he came home, detailed enough that a reader could have used them as a guide. He wrote about the war twice. The first entry said, "On schedule. Not enjoying this." The second, 6 months later, said the same thing. The Keth adapted again. They stopped trying to take human positions and started trying to simply destroy them. If the infrastructure could not be held, it could be denied to both sides, and denial was a form of attrition. They hit human fuel depots, communication relays, repair stations. They were effective. They destroyed significant assets. The humans did not rebuild the assets they lost. They rerouted around them. The supply network thinned and stretched and kept moving, because it had apparently been designed from the beginning to function without any specific piece of itself. The Keth destroyed a node, and the traffic that had run through that node simply redistributed, slower but continuous, across paths that should not have had the capacity to carry it, and somehow did. The Keth strategists began to experience something unfamiliar. Not defeat, they were not losing engagements. They won most of the direct battles they fought. Their ships were strong, their crews were skilled, their tactics were sound. But every victory produced less result than it should have. They were fighting correctly and achieving nothing, which is a specific kind of frustration that has no good solution, because the frustration itself is the strategy being used against you. Meanwhile, quietly and without announcement, human vessels began to appear near Keth's supply lines. Not attacking them, watching them, logging them, following Keth resupply ships back to their fuel sources and their maintenance stations and their communication hubs, and building, over several months, a complete and detailed picture of how the Keth Dominion sustained its fleet in the field. The Council was watching all of this. 17 species, through diplomatic and intelligence channels, following a war between humanity and the most experienced military power in the known galaxy. They watched the Keth fight well and gain nothing. They watched the human fleet absorb losses and keep functioning. They watched the shape of the conflict and slowly understood that they were watching something that had been designed well in advance by someone who understood what the end looked like before the beginning had started. 3 species, without coordinating with each other and without making any public statement, quietly began restructuring their own defense systems. They did not announce this. They filed it under technical upgrades and regulatory compliance. They modeled the new structures on patterns observed in human military architecture, distributed, redundant, without single points of failure. They did not want to be on the wrong side of this kind of war. At month 14, humanity stopped trying to defend anything. The human fleet pulled back from every contested position simultaneously, in a movement so coordinated that the Keth interpreted it first as a trap, and spent 3 weeks probing cautiously before accepting that the positions had genuinely been abandoned. The Keth took them. They held territory now. They had won something. Then the trade routes closed. One by one, the commercial corridors that ran through neutral space around Keth territory became unavailable. Mechanical faults, routing disputes, regulatory holds filed through the Council's Commercial Transit Authority by shipping companies that had no obvious connection to Earth, and whose legal challenges would take, by the most optimistic estimate, 2 years to resolve. The fuel depots that the Keth fleet used in the outer systems developed supply problems. The communication relays outside Keth home space began to experience what the filed reports called unexplained interference. The Keth Dominion was not destroyed. Its home system was untouched. Its fleet was intact. Its government was functional. It was in a box, a very large, very comfortable box, with all its own furniture and food and light. A box that was getting smaller in ways that were difficult to point to specifically and impossible to fight directly. Vethkara stood at his office window and looked at the reports and understood what he was seeing. He had done something similar to 2 other species across his career. He recognized the shape of it from the inside now, which was a different experience from recognizing it from the outside. From the outside, it looked like strategy. From the inside, it felt like weather. At month 22, the Keth Dominion sent a message to the United Earth government. It said they wished to discuss terms. Quan received the message at 0800 on a Tuesday. He replied by end of day. The armistice talks took 11 days. The terms were simple. Reparations for Meridian Station and the 11 civilians killed in the opening engagement. Return of all human assets seized during the conflict. A formal acknowledgement of responsibility, signed and filed with the Galactic Council. No territory, no ongoing tribute, no occupation, no humiliation. The Keth negotiators kept waiting for the other terms, the real ones, the punitive ones, the things that were held back in early sessions, to be produced as a final pressure at the end. They did not come. The terms were the terms. Humanity wanted acknowledgement and reparations, and to go home. He noted the time in his personal log, and wrote a single sentence about the restaurant in Seoul. Then, he gave the order to stand down, and began the process of bringing his people back. The war lasted 22 months. The Keth Dominion had fought 31 wars, and won 31 wars. After the armistice, the historians noted that this record was technically still intact. The Keth had not lost. They had simply run out of room, in every direction, all at once, and chosen to stop. In the council chambers, 12 species updated their official classification of humanity in their diplomatic databases. The old entry had said peaceful and non-aggressive and low threat. And those words were not exactly wrong. They were just, the analysts noted, applied to the wrong thing. The new entries all add some version of the same word. The word was restrained. 3 years after the war, the chamber smelled the same. 17 kinds of air, poorly blended, never comfortable. Osei noticed it again for the first time in years, the way familiar things become invisible, until something shifts, and then you see them fresh. She walked to her seat, and sat down, and looked at a room she had sat in for 14 years, and found it changed in ways she could not point to directly. The seats were in the same positions. The clerk was at her usual station. The agenda on the table was a standard council agenda. Trade disputes, a border demarcation hearing, a request from a new species for provisional membership. Ordinary business, the kind of session that generated no public attention and no historical record. And then, at item 7 on the agenda, a vote. The Surath Collective had been destabilizing a shared border region for 2 years. Their ships had interfered with 2 council members' shipping lanes. Their government had refused diplomatic contact 4 times. The proposed response was a military authorization, 3 council members, coordinated action, a show of force, reasonable scope, limited objectives. The kind of proposal that passed easily in a body that had been making these decisions for centuries. Osei read the proposal document the same way she read all proposal documents, line by line, slowly, without expression. Rashid sat beside her. He was 4 years older than when he had first taken this seat. He had read the complete archive by now, all 200 years of it, every session, every subdirectory, every margin note he'd been able to find. He understood things now that he could not have understood at 24. One of those things was that the patience required to run the kind of long, quiet game Osei ran was not a skill you could teach. It was a thing you either had or did not. He was reasonably sure he did not have it. He was also reasonably sure that was fine, because she did. The session moved through its items. The trade disputes were resolved. The border demarcation hearing was postponed. The new species was granted provisional membership, with a ceremony that was brief and sincere, and that 3 delegates visibly found moving, though none of them said so out loud. Item 7 came to the floor. The delegate presenting the Surath proposal was from the Vel Confederacy, a species of careful, methodical thinkers who built their cases the way engineers build structures, load-bearing and well-jointed. He laid out the situation cleanly: the shipping interference, the diplomatic refusals, the pattern of escalation. He noted that the Council had a responsibility to protect the free movement of commerce, and that soft responses to hard behavior historically produced more hard behavior. It was not wrong about any of the facts it cited. He sat. The clerk opened the floor for responses before the vote. Several delegates spoke. There was consensus forming. Not complete consensus, but the kind of comfortable majority that stops needing to count. The body language of the room moved toward yes, the way it always moved toward yes, when the arguments were solid and the opposition was expected to be symbolic. Then the clerk said, "The United Earth Delegation." The room changed. It was not dramatic. Nobody moved. Nobody made a sound. The change was internal. A shift in the quality of attention. The way a room full of people all look at the same thing at the same time, without meaning to. 14 species found their eyes moving to the human delegation table. Vethkara was watching from the Keth seat. He had remained a council member after the armistice, because Osei had specifically requested, in the post-war diplomatic proceedings, that no punitive removal of Keth council representation be included in the terms. The Keth delegation had found this confusing. Their analysts had spent weeks trying to understand the strategic benefit to humanity of keeping their most adversarial council member in the room. They had not found a satisfying answer. Osei had offered no explanation. She stood. The room held itself very still. She pressed the red button. The 44th consecutive human no vote in military authorization proceedings was recorded in the session minutes. Nobody laughed. Nobody made any sound at all. The silence was complete and total, and lasted long enough that the clerk glanced up from her documentation to verify that the session was still running. The silence was simply what the room was doing. Vethkara looked at his table. Osei remained standing, which was the part nobody expected. She had cast her vote. She could sit. She stood. The Surath Collective has been interfering with shipping lanes because 3 of their member worlds are in the 7th year of a severe drought, she said. They are not destabilizing the border. They are trying to reach resources they cannot reach through channels that have been closed to them by a trade agreement that excluded them at the time of signing. She paused. We have reviewed their request history. They asked for help through proper channels 4 times before they stopped asking. The 4 diplomatic refusals cited in the proposal were their responses to our refusals, not the other way around. The Vel delegate who had presented the proposal was looking at his documents. His expression was careful. We recommend a humanitarian mission, Osei continued, agricultural technology and water reclamation systems. We are willing to lead it. We ask that the military authorization be tabled until the mission has had 12 months to produce results. She sat. The chamber was quiet for a long time after that. Not the stunned quiet of Meridian Station's aftermath. That had been the quiet of a species discovering they were wrong about something fundamental. This was different. This was the quiet of a room full of species that were thinking very carefully about what they had just heard, and comparing it to what they had assumed they would hear. Rashid was writing. He was writing fast, the way he wrote when he thought something needed to be documented precisely and immediately. The vote on the military authorization was tabled. The humanitarian mission proposal was moved to formal consideration. The session ended an hour later, with 3 species having submitted letters of intent to contribute resources to the Surath mission. Afterward, in the corridor, a young delegate from the provisional membership species, the one that had just been admitted today, who had sat through the Surath vote as their first real council session, caught up to Osei and asked her a question. She was new enough to ask it directly, without the diplomatic layering that older delegates would have used. She asked why humanity always voted no. Osei looked at her. She looked at her the way she looked at anyone who asked the real question, with complete attention, without performance. "We know what we are," she said. "We have always known. We spent a very long time on our own planet learning what happens when a species that is good at war decides war is the first answer instead of the last one. We learned it the hard way, the way that leaves marks. The no votes were never about being peaceful. They were about being honest with ourselves, about what it costs. Every time we vote yes, we know exactly what yes means, because we have done it before, to ourselves, many times. We prefer to find the other door first." The young delegate thought about this. She asked, "What if there is no other door?" "Then we vote yes," Osei said simply, "and we are very good at it. That is what the Keth found out. That is what all of you know now." She glanced back at the chamber doors. "I hope it does not need demonstrating again." She walked to the transit port. Rashid walked beside her and said nothing until they were on the shuttle. Then he said that 3 more species had filed requests to align their defense architectures with Earth systems. Quietly, through technical channels. No public statement. Osei nodded. He said that the Surath mission planning team had already received 12 applications from human engineers wanting to volunteer. She nodded again. He asked what she was thinking about. She looked out the window at the dark. "The 45th vote," she said. "I hope it's a long time coming." She did not say anything else. The shuttle moved through the dark, and the council station fell away behind them, and the stars looked the same as they always looked. Impossibly far, impossibly numerous, full of species that had spent the last 3 years quietly relearning what they thought they knew about the one sitting beside them. Humanity had spent 200 years being patient. 1 year of war. And now the long patience again, the preferred state, the one that fit better, the one that did not leave marks. The galaxy did not laugh anymore when the human delegate stood to speak. It listened. That was enough.